come to an end as a regular thing in society? I saw this tweet today by a professor. She says, I teach English. Part of my job is literally reading books, and I'm barely making it through 2 to 3 a year. We're asking the wrong question and why the students can't read. We should ask when are we supposed to find time for joy in a world that only values capital? And yeah, I kind of understand exactly what she's getting at. There is this idea that the life of the mind has been almost forgotten about in place of we might say, the active life. I get that. And yeah, I would say that this is maybe representative of a larger pattern than just sort of capital. I think most younger people and many older people no longer read much at all, and it's not because of, like, let's say, capitalism, but it's partly because the new media is visual and auditory. It's about short clips, podcasts, and TV shows. It's because a whole industry has popped up that is focused on, shall we say, TikTok and speed media and short clips. So when I say I don't think we're really in a reading society anymore, what I'm really getting at is we don't really have the capability or desire to read or sit down and read for 2 hours and trace an argument from the beginning to finish. Obviously, all of us can read most of us can see the alphabet and articulate the sounds the alphabet makes into words. So social media is around, and people will read descriptions on social media. That kind of reading is there. I'm talking about the long-form reading of arguments. Used to be that you read a ton of books in high school and in college, and reading was sort of expected if you wanted to be, I don't know, let's say respectable or part of the literary society that was present. Now, I'm not a prophet, but I kind of think that's gone, or maybe already is gone. I think that we already are kind of living in a world, or at least a society, in which reading has been so transformed that really much of what we're doing now is turning towards TikTok, to YouTube, to podcast, to TV, and we're using our hearing and seeing more. And if I'm honest, for most of history, society as a whole couldn't or didn't regularly read. If you were religious, you would go to a church and you would hear the Bible read, or you'd have stories told to you. Reading was much more auditory. It was much more about hearing. Maybe you would see images that would remind you of stories. This is pretty normal. Remember, recently I told someone to sit down and read a book for 5 hours on a Saturday, and my sense is that probably rang hollow, because it's not that no one wants to read or to understand more. It's simply that we don't think that we can. Like, just the amount of possibilities that are laid out in front of us don't say, one thing you could do on Saturday is read for 5 hours and trace an argument very carefully to grow in your understanding of that book, that author, and to become a more virtuous person. It's just not there. It's not because people don't want to learn or something like that. It's just simply not what's happening. And that's completely fine. I am not going to be mad at someone who does that. At the same time, I think that means we need to be careful just how we expect the future to look. I'm fairly convinced that the future will look a lot more like TikTok. Short videos, short auditory things. You'll have some long podcasts. That might be more like the more thinking group of people might be more the podcast people, and then everyone else will just do a little bit here and there, or do social media. I do think there'll be pockets of readers. There'll be the classical school kids, and so on. One of the interesting things is we used to kind of criticize homeschoolers for having maybe less of an education than public schoolers, but when you look at the data, man alive, if you go to public school, you may not be able to read in the way that I'm describing afterwards. Obviously, you'll be able to read like a tweet or something. So maybe there's a big shift coming, and we need to be aware of it. This video didn't have, a huge point to it. I don't want to be a prophet of doom and gloom, but I do want to say that we're probably moving to a non-reading society. And going back to this tweet, I'm just curious. This is an English professor who can barely make it through two to three books a year, and if she can't, can we? I don't know.